Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 10 of the Forgotten Fields Project. I'm meteorologist Robin Reed. My co-host, Tara Williamson, will be alongside in just a moment. As we drop this episode in mid-April, we marvel at what the weather gods have blown our way this early spring. We had days near 90 degrees, followed by days of frost. Well, that damaged budding grapevines and threatened peaches and apple blossoms. Super dry soil that eventually saw rain, along with lightning, hail, and, more damaging, the winds. The number of days with 30 to 40 mile an hour wind gusts has been striking this season. We hope that your farming and gardening ventures have not been adversely affected. So, what do we want to talk about today? Well, maybe this will give you a clue. Listen closely. That's right, coyotes. Haunting to listen to, damaging to your farm in several ways, and a topic that Tara wanted to discuss with a Virginia Tech professor that she admires very much. As you listen to Dr. Parkhurst, I think you'll understand why. This is an episode we call Coyote Ugly.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us, Dr. Parkhurst. Kind of want to get some background information about you. So you are involved with the Virginia Cooperative Extension, and I'm also a professor at Virginia Tech.
Yes, I wear two hats here. I'm on the faculty in the Department of Fish and Wildlife Conservation, so I have a teaching and a research responsibility there. But unlike most of my colleagues in the department, I also have this responsibility with the Virginia Cooperative Extension System, and I am the wildlife specialist for the state. So my coverage is statewide.
Well, I was looking over your research, and I am fascinated by your coyote research, and I kind of want to get into that. So tell me, how long have you been in this type of field, and what got you started in it?
Well, here at Tech, I'm entering my 33rd year on the faculty.
Good number.
The focus really has been lately on dealing with what we label as human-wildlife conflicts and trying to find resolution to the types of problems broadly for all types of wildlife.
Wow. So do you come to good plans, and you've executed those plans for conflict resolution, some of these projects?
Well, each one of these situations is probably unique because there's so many circumstances that are different depending on the site, location. I think some of the more challenging ones today are, well, you had mentioned agriculture. We have a long history of working in those environments, but I think the more challenging ones today are coming in our suburban and ex-urban, sort of the developing landscape. Yeah, and again, we're dealing with people, unlike in the rural areas, who haven't grown up with wildlife. They don't have an intimate sort of relationship with nature on a daily basis. And they're not familiar with a lot of these types of situations.
Right.
They don't understand what their actions may do to contribute to the creation of these kinds of problems. And they have very different expectations than what I think our folks in the rural areas have. And that's based a little bit more on their prior experience and their knowledge. So it's posed some interesting challenges here in the last couple of decades.
I think that's probably what you're going to uncover a lot is by looking at these relationships, understanding even when we get further into the coyotes. It's almost just a way for us to look in a mirror at ourselves. I think we're going to do a lot of self-evaluation in the process.
Yes.
Yes, we're going to uncover maybe a lot of hard truths about ourselves, the way we kind of attack problems. Even just using that word attack, everything's so aggressive with humans normally.
Well, I'd say we're just better understanding ourselves.
Where we fit in the natural world. We're also an animal. So.
And we're very good at taking ourselves out of that role.
Yes. Yes. And maybe as an agriculturalist and a farmer, I think first and foremost we're always supposed to be stewards of the land and trying to always fit that in. We're living with the land, not against it. We may be manipulating the landscape, but we're creating ecosystems. We're responsible for these ecosystems.
Yes.
We're almost like mini many deities over these properties too.
Mhm.
So we decide what lives, what dies, what breeds, what plants. I mean, we develop the whole entire system. Every trophic level is sometimes up to us, and that's a lot.
That's a lot of responsibility.
It is.
Some people don't take it seriously.
No. And then when you have the, of course, develop it moving in, that is a fascinating little factor and variable to throw in there. Oh, my caffeine. Yeah. So let's get into some of the details. I was looking through one of your pamphlets we're going to post this online too. This was just published last year from Virginia Cooperative Extension.
Yes.
And I had no idea that coyotes weren't always in this area. I thought they were endemic to this region.
No. They are one of the new, some people would view it as invaders to our area. But they've only been here since the sort of mid to early 50s.
Wow.
And they came primarily out of the Midwest, the Great Plains. That was their native range, and it extended up into Canada, down into parts of Mexico. And sort of that was where home was for a long time. But their population grew, and they were very effective at dispersal. And so we saw a movement as many of their competitors that were native in this area were exterminated. So things like the native wolf, the mountain lion, other competing predators that used to live here were basically eliminated by humans, either by direct harvest or by changing the habitat that supported them. So in essence, we had kind of a empty niche here, which the coyotes were very effective at filling.
Okay, so there wasn't pressure from out west for them to move here. It was just the opportunity opened up.
Well, it was a little bit of both, that the population in the Midwest area continued to grow, and founders were moving away from that population, seeking new territories of their own.
Okay.
And we happened to be in an area here in the east that was offering that opportunity, which they readily filled and fit right in.
So their range, I was trying to research it earlier. They are just like a pack, like we would think about with wolves. They have the matriarch, the patriarch.
Yeah, I would classify it more as a family social unit as opposed to a pack. Most of the ones that we see, they tend to function at that level, that you have the two adults, the immediate year's offspring, and oftentimes several females from the previous year's offspring stay with mom and help and assist. The males often are driven away before the next breeding period occurs. That's to reduce competition. Those are going to go out and try to find their own territory and establish their own family unit.
Okay.
And one of the unique things with what we've found as we've researched these things is that there is a fairly sizable number of these unmated, what we call floaters, that exist very successfully in and between the established territories of these other family units that are protecting and holding territories. And so when there is a mortality that occurs in one of those units, these founders or these floaters very quickly will move in and try to take up that territory and take over the social unit that was there.
The floaters are probably young, unmated males.
Oftentimes, yeah.
So it's just rogue bachelor.
In a way, yeah.
Whew, okay. That sounds quite dangerous and hormonal. Fascinating. So their hunting and foraging preferences. We have these social groups. What's their range like, and where are they hunting normally?
It's very going to be dependent on what the resources or the richness of the area that they're occupying.
Okay.
On average, somewhere between 6, 8, 10 square miles.
Relatively small.
Again, that depends on how rich it is. They don't need more than what they can acquire. They're not going to range needlessly and spend excess energy for no reason.
And we're providing the perfect place for them, and especially in the suburbs. We have gardens, we have fences that are keeping in rabbits, other
Yeah.
little rodents. I mean,
And those are all potential examples of the
Okay.
kind of factors that would influence their range size.
okay.
Again, if it's very plentiful and they can find everything that they need in a very small area, there's no reason to spend that time and effort defending large territory.
And they're not active hunters all the time. They're opportunistic.
Yes, some people would say in some of these urban environments, they're scavengers. I prefer that they're just opportunistic.
Okay.
They can be carnivorous at certain times, and they'll be herbivorous at others.
Wow.
So depending on what's most available, easy to get, that's where they're going to put their effort.
And with all these roadkill deer, with the increased deer population, that's just heaven then.
Well, yeah, they take full advantage of that as a resource as well. That can come as a hazard, though, because if the deer was clipped as a roadkill and you're out there in the road, you can get nailed too.
And is that have we been seeing trends with that? Is that an issue?
In some areas,
Okay.
I wouldn't say it's a critical factor of mortality for them, but
Okay.
they're cautious in that regard.
They seem very careful. They seem very calculated.
Yes.
Okay. Because even with their dens, do they have just one den, or how does that work? Because I think they had multiple, right? from those
Well,
deer?
similar to the other native canids, the foxes, typically they're going to have one main site that is the sort of the birthing den. But elsewhere within their territory, they will have secondary or sort of emergency shelters where they will go. And so if something spooks them, they don't feel comfortable there at the main one, they will pick up the kits and move them to the secondary site.
I mean, that takes premeditated. That's thinking the problem through. In case something happens, I have a backup, multiple backups to move to.
Well, there's a lot of animals that demonstrate that. I'm not sure we can be correct in saying that they're thinking this through, but, kind of an anthropomorphic view of it. But
And maybe that's why I'm thinking this. I'm thinking about, man, I don't even plan out my, what I'm going to make for dinner all week. So maybe it's like I lack the foresight. So this is impressive to me. That's my baseline. Okay.
no, but that's survival.
Yes.
If you feel threatened and there's a potential you're going to lose your investment in offspring, you're going to have a backup.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up with the survival, because it's something I think sometimes people misunderstand. We talk about survival of the fittest, which is what we're talking about here. That doesn't mean the strongest. That means how many offspring they have.
Right. You're
Okay.
trying to get your genes into the population and have that spread.
And they seem very, very fit from a survival standpoint.
Well, they are, I would consider them to be one of our most adaptable animals on the landscape.
And is it true that if food isn't very readily available for them, they'll have, or we kill off a lot of them, that they'll have even more offspring to compensate for what was lost?
Well, we have evidence that, they respond to pressures that are exerted on them in different ways. They can attempt to produce more offspring per litter. They can back up a little bit and talk about their social dynamic. It is those two pairs, or the female and the male, and they mate typically for life. They exert a very strong social pressure on others in their family unit, so that only the alpha female is doing the breeding. Now, when you see cases where really hard pressure is put on the population, sometimes they allow other females in a group to breed.
Wow. So not only are we getting a larger next generation of progeny, but we're also increased the genetic variation too.
Well, the number of participants in the breeding effort will go up.
Okay. So it's actually creating a stronger population too.
It can. But it's a response, though. When you start eliminating other elements within your population, that frees up those resources, which makes it better, easier for you, and you take advantage of that.
So we're never really going to see a decrease then. They're always going to compensate.
We have not seen that happen.
So, and if there's readily available resources, they're probably going to have more offspring because the resources are there.
Up to certain limits, because that social dynamic will kick in. They don't like having too many of them around.
A self-regulating species.
In many regards, that's what we would consider it.
Wow.
So it's not going to be exponential, and it's going to keep growing.
So if they're self-regulating then, how are we to judge what is a good carrying capacity for them? How do we know? How can we say you're overpopulated?
I really don't like using those terms
Uh-huh.
because they're just so undefined. What does overabundance or
Right.
overpopulation
In regards
mean?
to what, relative to what?
Exactly. So in this case, they self-regulate on what we call density-dependent factors. And so there are other animals that also demonstrate this. But there is a tolerance within the population of how many is enough.
Fascinating.
And so most of the biologists here in the state are of the opinion that right now the population has basically stabilized itself.
Okay.
And the number of coyotes that are out there is pretty much going to be what we're going to have. And there will be fluctuations up and down over time as these pressures are exerted, but the period of recovery is amazingly quick.
And is a general consensus that that is healthy for the ecosystem? You see all the other levels, nothing's overly affected, prey?
At this point, there are nothing major that we've identified. Now, there is some competition and sort of the results of some of that predatory action. Coyotes and red foxes don't get along well. And so in areas where we have seen a strong presence of coyotes over time, oftentimes the red fox numbers will go down.
Okay.
They both are well adapted and prefer feeding along sort of edges, that interface between field and forest. And they're very effective at hunting in that. But given that the coyote is bigger, perhaps more aggressive than the red fox, the competition state there is favoring the coyotes.
Okay. And in the food chain, in those little trophic levels, it's basically a one-for-one replacement. It's not going to matter if you replace the red foxes with coyotes.
No.
And then the coyotes will stabilize, and that's it.
Yeah.
So if we kill off more of them, if we try to control the population, it's like a coyote hydra, right? It's not going to, I mean, that's kind of what it is.
In some ways. Now, that's not to say that we can't manipulate numbers. And given places like some of the agricultural settings, there's a pretty strong effort locally to try to keep numbers down. But it becomes a constant demand then. You can reduce numbers and sort of reduce the negative effects for a period of time, but if you back off, they're going to refill those open opportunities.
So you have to keep a defensive bubble around the farm, and that's it. And it's going to be a constant battle, because if you ever let that bubble pop, they will come back in and recolonize.
They are crafty in that way.
So then what type of efforts can we do? What have we tried in the past as humans to control this?
Well, probably our strongest and best defense is actually fencing.
Okay.
Now, that works great if you're on flat land, but over here in the West, with the mountains, that can be a challenge because you've got all kinds of topographic diversity, and it's hard to keep a fence tight to the ground. So it's always a battle in that regard. But a good, well-built, strong fence is probably your best neighbor.
Once again, such an amazing conversation with Dr. James Parkhurst, the Associate Professor in the Department of Fish and Wildlife Conservation at Virginia Tech. I know my partner in crime here had a very, very great day. You were vibrating literally walking to the car after all this. You had such a good time.
I love every time you can kind of just change your whole entire outlook. So I went in there thinking I knew who the dog was, and I came out realizing that it might have been me after all that.
That's right. And we're excited to share with our listeners that down the road, we've got him scheduled for a topic that seems to be front of mind for a lot of people these days, and that is deer. Deer are always around. The deer are doing their thing. They're just deer. But the copious amounts that keep getting into harm's way, and it seems for some reason like maybe the last couple of years it's been more, And I think he's going to tell us a little bit about, how in a conservation sense they're thinking about that, and yet making it safer to just drive around without, dancing with deer.
Yeah, yes, of course, nice alliteration there. But I think once again it'll just challenge our perspective of where we fit into this model around us. Are we actually working with nature or against it?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Who's the who's who?
And so with that in mind, that's a pretty good topic coming up. But you've been baking up a new project here for our next podcast. Tell me a little bit about what you're thinking about. It sounds fairly newsworthy.
It is. So we're actually going to get into literally a hot topic. It's going to be agrivoltaics. So it's a new type of model that's been a little hot, as you said, lately. And it's kind of combining supposedly a sustainable system in which we have solar panels in conjunction with regular farmland on the same property. And is it sustainable? Does it work together? What's going on with it?
A lot of questions about that. If you ask just anybody, you'll get a different sort of take on what's happening, why it's happening. Is it good for anything? Is it bad for anything? We're not really sure.
Yeah.
So I feel like we've got some pretty good potential to crack open some interesting information. So we'll invite all of our listeners to come back for that one. But for today, we hope you've enjoyed a little bit about coyotes and a little bit about the change of season. By the time you hear this, the daylight saving will have commenced, and we'll have lost another hour of sleep, and away we go.
Yes, I've learned this time, daylight saving, not daylight savings.
That's my leader right there. That's what we want. Hey, folks, it's been a delight to have you with us, and we invite you to tune in to our next episode as well as we continue our journey in the Forgotten Fields Project.